From the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Introduce everything. Just tell me when to start.
Okay, and go ahead.
Today is Wednesday, November 17th, 2010, and I am sitting here with Dr. Myrtle Gonza Glascoe for an oral history interview on her involvement in the civil rights movement. Dr. Glascoe, you were born and raised in Washington, D.C. Can you tell me about some of the early instances in your life that contributed to your involvement in the movement?
Right off the top of my head, it's hard to think of things that may have contributed to me going into the movement. My family wasn't very political. Honestly, it's hard to think of anything. But I was always, as my godmother would say, I was always too frank. Mm-hmm. Whatever I thought, I said. And I had to learn how to not do that, because if I saw things and they were not right, I made it clear that I did not agree. And so, but right now, I don't think of anything from my childhood that led to me coming into the movement.
So even as a child, you were pretty honest and straightforward.
Oh, I was very honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was also get up and go, because my brother and my sister used to make jokes about me. They would say, "She always has money," and I would, we had to bargain with my dad to get money, and so he didn't give us an allowance, but I would go to the grocery store and I would carry orders. I would take groceries for people to their house for a quarter. And then when I got to where I had a bicycle, I would do that too. I'd put the groceries on the bicycle and take them for a quarter. And so I would, that's the reason they said I always had money, because I would make a little money. Then sometimes I would come to my father and I would say, well, I want to go to the carnival. The carnival came to D.C., I think, once a year. And I would tell my dad, I want to go to the carnival. And then I would tell him, I said, what I need is $6 to go to the carnival, but I already have $3. So all you have to do is give me $3. So he was willing to do that.
Well, it sounds like you're straightforward. You said what you wanted, and you were
Right.
able to negotiate
Exactly
what you got. So you take kind of that straightforward nature. You graduated from two of the finest African American educational institutions in the country, Dunbar High School and Howard University.
Yes.
Were there instances at Dunbar or Howard that inspired you to become involved in the struggle for civil rights?
I don't think of any in particular. Let me see, at Dunbar. No, I don't think of any. But the thing that interests me about that is people, especially my classmates at Dunbar, when they see me, when we go to our reunions and stuff, they always tell me that I always had something going. I was always making fun or, doing stuff that was kind of not quite acceptable. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I don't remember anything at Dunbar. Let me see, at Dunbar.
Were there any clubs and organizations, or were there discussions among students about civil rights issues?
No, and at the time I wasn't into that stuff. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I was just going to school, mm-hmm. and I was going to school, and I wasn't doing my best. I was just going to school, and I was getting by. But I remember my English class. I enjoyed that, and I remember one occasion where I knew that this young man I read the Esquire magazine, and my father used to get a whole lot of stuff. The Life magazine, he got all 3 newspapers, and I read it all. And so this particular classmate of mine, we had to write an essay. And so he read his essay, and I recognized it as an essay I had read in the Esquire magazine. And so I told the teacher about that. And so, but anyway, I don't think that particularly speaks to me being involved in
Right.
the movement.
What about your time at Howard? So many people talk about college as an opportunity to kind of expand their horizons, whether it's through activities or courses. Can you pick a moment, or were there certain things that really attracted you and kind of sparked your imagination and
In
involvement?
relationship to the movement?
In relation to the movement, but or also anything, because you never know what kind of spurs you along.
I hate to say it.
Nothing particular?
I went to school
Uh-huh.
and I partied.
Okay, so you were living the young college experience.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, and I didn't realize at the time how good a student I was. I had this great facility for going to class and taking notes and reading my notes before an exam and getting an excellent grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so in these years, people have said to me how smart I was and how they liked to be in class with me and to hear me say things. But anyway, there was nothing political going on in my life, and I think about it a lot, that there was so much political going on in the city that I knew nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I'm trying to remember.
So what happened after college? What did you do next?
I took a teaching position at a Catholic high school in right after college. I was a health and physical education major.
Okay.
I took a teaching position right after college at a boarding school for young black women, and that might have fired me up because I was aware of how discriminatory the nuns were to our young girls. And they had these strict rules and regulations. They wouldn't let the girls dance, or if they did let them dance, they screened all the records, and the records that the girls really wanted to dance to, they couldn't dance to those. And so I was a health and physical education teacher, and one of my phys ed sessions was devoted to dancing. And I saw to it that the records that the girls wanted to dance to, they got to dance to those records.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that probably added to the fact that there were some other things that happened that, and they asked me to leave before the end of the year. I had a young lady to ask me one day in class, could she get pregnant by kissing? And so I stopped the class and I diagrammed how she could get pregnant.
And they didn't like that?
No, not at all. And so anyway, they didn't get rid of me right away, but I also was expected to go to Mass. And I would go to Mass, but I couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stopped going to Mass. And then one day I was sitting in my room and I was knitting. And I took up knitting while I was there because it was an isolated place. And my room was way up in the top of this castle-like building. And I was knitting, and a knock came on the door. It was the Mother Superior and the principal of the school, and they both said to me, they had prayed for me and prayed for me and prayed for me. And they had come to this unfortunate conclusion that I had to go. And they said, you have to go by tonight. And so I then said to them, well, this money that I'm making here is scheduled for me to go back to graduate school. And if you cut me off now, I won't be able to do that. And so by the time I finished, they agreed to pay me for the rest of the year. Just leave.
Still the negotiator.
Anyway, and so I have no consciousness of that moving me to the movement. But I think, the fact that I was feeling oppressed
Mm-hmm.
and, and frustrated and angry and whatever.
So is there that catch me if I'm doing it again?
Just nod happily. We're rolling again.
Okay. So after that first job, was there a point where you had an awakening or a consciousness that you wanted to become more involved? I mean,
I was after. Well, it was a few years later. I went back to School of Social Work in 1958. I took my degree at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work in 1960, and I was working at the Rosewood State Hospital in outside of Baltimore as a social worker. You know, I did social group work and social casework with the families of the children that I served. And one day I was at lunch, and one of my coworkers says to me, "Why don't you come down to the meeting tonight?" I said, "What meeting?" He says, he was the chairman of Baltimore Core. And so he invited me to come to the meeting. And I went to the meeting, and I got involved. And so I didn't believe in picketing. And so I refused, because I didn't believe in nonviolence. So I refused to walk the picket line. But I would come and I would do all kinds of things behind the scenes. I would drive people places. I would do support work and all kinds of stuff like that, but I just wouldn't walk the picket line. And so then one day they said to me, "Come on and go with us. We're going to sit in." And I said, "Sit in where?" They said they were going to the White Coffee Pot. And that was one of the places that we were not allowed to go. And so I went with them to the White Coffee Pot, and as soon as we sat down, there was this guy who got up, and the guy came to us. He had grease on him, it seemed like from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet, dirty apron, greasy hair. He read this thing to us which said we had to get up and go. And so the intention was that we would get up and go. And so we got up and we left. And I was so mad. I could feel the anger. All the way. I could feel the anger. And anyway, it was like a rod of steel was put up my back. And I can't even describe how I felt. That turned me on. And so from that point on, I got involved in picketing. And I never got arrested, but we were doing Route 40 things at that time. And the Route 40 demonstrations, and people, what I was surprised to learn once I got involved was that when someone was going to go to jail, they made a decision to go to jail, to actually go and do what they were not supposed to do, and refuse to remove themselves. Like if we had wanted to go to jail that day, we would have not gotten up and left the restaurant. And then the police would have come and arrested us. As a matter of fact, there were 5 police cars outside waiting to arrest us. And I need a tissue, you guys. You can get me some toilet paper out of the bathroom. I'm sorry I didn't bring it with me.
tissue.
Yeah. So anyway. So what was I saying?
We're talking about how it was deliberate. Some of the actions
So anyway, I had not known that. So whenever we would go to different places where we were planning to sit in on Route 40, then there would be certain people who had come and they had brought their toothbrush and whatever they thought they needed to spend the night in jail. And so I never would agree to that. I didn't want to be in jail, didn't want to be arrested, but I would go and I would support that. I would picket when it was time to get arrested. I would leave, just like with a whole lot of, there were other people who would leave too. So that was my introduction to the movement. And in that process, I remember going over to Howard and picking up folks like Cortland Cox, and driving them to stuff we were doing on Route 40 and Bill Mahoney. I don't know if you're probably not familiar with those names, but I remember going up there and picking them up. You know, it was about these are the youth, and they need support to get where they're going and that kind of stuff. Because I was still a professional social worker, and I saw myself, you know, a little bit back from the so-called civil rights workers.
Okay.
And so, anyway.
I mean, it seems like there was an evolution in the levels of your involvement. And I just wanted to go back to something that you had said first when you didn't want to picket and you didn't believe in nonviolence. Can you kind of explain what you meant by that? And then you get to a point where you do want to picket. And then there's certain levels. Was it part of your attitude evolving? Or?
It didn't make any sense to me to have people beating on you, and you didn't, and you couldn't respond to that in a like manner. And I had not attended any sessions where you were taught about nonviolence. I had no knowledge of the philosophical approach to nonviolence, and so that was my gut level response to it. And when I went to work at CORE, went to work with Baltimore CORE, I took that with me, those understandings with me. And but as I said, once I got so angry that this greasy, uneducated person would come and stand there and tell me I wasn't as good as he was. Get out of my face. I will knock you down.
So it sounds like, to me, it's more than just joining up. It's understanding the philosophy and the rationale, that it wasn't just a mass of people coming together, that it was deliberate, it was planned, there were strategies.
Exactly.
And as you got more involved,
And I came to understand.
Okay.
I could participate, but that's my way. If I don't understand, I can't do it. And things I don't, some things in life I've had to come to say to myself, well, you're not going to understand that. You're still going to have to accept it. It's there for you. And it's for you, and you need it. But even though you don't understand it, and I'm talking about things spiritual right now, there's so many things that we don't understand, but they happen, and we're surrounded by those things. And it's to our benefit to choose to make ourselves available to those things, to open ourselves to receive on that level. Yes.
How did you come to make your way south to participate in the freedom movement?
Well, I left Baltimore in the summer of 1962 to take a position in Los Angeles, California, working with emotionally disturbed, delinquency-prone youth. And when I got to Los Angeles, I reconnected with CORE, and I continued to attend CORE meetings, and like that. What was the question you asked me?
How you ended up making your way south.
Okay.
So you went from Baltimore to
I went
LA.
to Baltimore to LA, and then as part of my work, as a result of being connected with Baltimore CORE, I came into contact with Frederica Tier, who was a national officer for CORE. And she would come down to Baltimore sometimes, and we became good friends. And so once I was in Los Angeles, and she was living in San Francisco, and so I went up to visit her one time. And she introduced me to Mike Miller, who was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee chair of the support group there. And so I met him, and I liked that area. And so when I completed I had a temporary job at in Los Angeles. So when that job was over, I moved to San Francisco, and I began working with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee Support Network there. And so right now we're in early 1964, and so I went up there, and so I was in San Francisco during the summer of 1964, and Mike would go down. Mike was in the South, and he brought all kinds of stuff back for me to read, and so he in effect, I mean, it's almost as if he had a plan to educate me. I don't know that he did. But all the stuff that he brought back lots of papers and all those things, and I read. It was like I was eating dinner every day. I was reading so much. I enjoyed it, and I got to understand what people were trying to do in the South. And then, from time to time, somebody would come out, and so I got to meet lots of people. I got to meet Larry Lawrence Guillot and Ivanhoe Donaldson and Mrs. Hamer. One time we had a workshop and Mrs. Hamer came, and I had to drive her around in my car, and I was so excited. I was just thrilled. And she was just as down-to-earth as she could be. As soon as we got away from all the folks, she pulled out her tobacco, and she stuck it in her mouth. She says, "Phew, now I can get me a good chew." Anyway, and so that spring, I was on a committee to choose people to go south. And so I'm still not at the point yet where I have released my professional social work stuff. I'm still working as a social worker. And so I'm on this committee. And you see, the thing that happened was that during the summer of 1964, so many young white people went down, and many of them did not want to leave. And so there was a lot of concern about who would come down for the 65 summer, and how would decisions be made to try to get more people who would fit in better with the way things were. And so I was on a committee to help to choose those people. And in the midst of all that, I decided I was going to go. And actually my decision was facilitated by this young Chinese woman who worked in the office with me. And she had been traveling in Europe, and with her husband and I think 2 children, and her husband died, and there she was, with no husband and the 2 children, and so she had to come back, and she had to pick her life up and keep going, and so she and I got into this conversation. I was telling her how much I was attracted to being a part of the movement. And so she just looked at me. She says, "Well, why can't you go?" I said, I started thinking about all the reasons I couldn't go. And she says, Do you have any bills? No, I don't. Do you have a husband? No, I don't. Do you have any children? No, I don't. And so then she says, "There's no reason that you can't go." So I just stopped right then. And I said, "Okay, you can go." And so that's how I did it. And I signed myself up to go.
After signing everyone else up.
Yeah. So anyway.
Many people, and I think you alluded to this, who were born or grew up in the North have shared that they went to the South with the intention of only staying for a short time and then ended up staying for a long time. Did you have a plan for how long you were making the trip?
Initially, I went as a volunteer for the summer. I think back inside myself, I knew that I was going to want to be there more than one summer. But that wasn't up front in my mind. I got there and I got involved in the work, and I wanted to, and I stayed, I stayed beyond the summer. And so, because, we have cousins who lived in Southern Maryland, and we would go to visit our cousins, and when I was a teenager, we would go there, and I would have a great time when I was with my cousins in Southern Maryland. We would go to joints and we would dance and we would have a good time. And so I found quite a lot of a same kind of thing in the South. And in Arkansas, after we worked ourselves to death, then we would go to this. It wasn't the hall. The hall was the place, where my cousins lived. we would go to this, I think VFW Hall, and we would dance, and we would have a nice time. We would enjoy, and so. But that's not the reason I stayed. I got involved. I loved it. I really did. I loved the work.
Can we talk a little bit? Obviously, your work started long before you went south. I mean, getting involved in Pennsylvania and then moving out west. When you made it down south, what were some of your first responsibilities? What did you get involved in?
I was the director of the Freedom School in West Helena, Arkansas, and it was truly the result of the fact that I had worked in summer camps for many years as a camper and as a director. And so what I did, in so many words, was set up a day camp in West Helena, Arkansas, for those children there. And we did a lot of different kinds of activities. And of course, an important part of that was discussing with them what was going on in their communities and facilitating for them opportunities to express themselves and to write poetry if that was what they desired and stuff like that. And so that was the first thing I did. And the most important part of that summer for me was the guidance that I received from the workers who were there. Because one of the things they said to me, and as a matter of fact, Mike had said the same thing to me before I got in the South, that I needed to pay attention to what was going on around me, that I didn't need to get involved right away, thinking that I had something to offer or to lead or to guide, that it was important for me to watch and listen and learn. And as a matter of fact, the director of the project in West Helena told me, go to community meetings, but do not get up and tell people what you think. Stay in your seat. If you have to, write down what you think, and we can talk about it later. And so that was the most important experience for me that summer. Of course, I did voter registration. There were 9 of us volunteers that summer, and there were 2 of us who were black. And we did voter registration. We did. I did the Freedom School. We attended community meetings in different parts of the county, and so we got and I learned how to go places and just be there, and gradually get acquainted with people. People knew who I was, and I would go places and just kind of hang out, and gradually introduce myself to people, and then my goal would be to get entree, and then gradually ease into some discussion with them to find out where they were in terms of how they felt about being involved in the movement, how they felt about coming to the meeting once a week, and once they were at the meeting, would they do other things related to what we were doing? Would they canvass? Would they picket? What would they do? That kind of stuff.
You also did some work in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
This same kind of thing, or
exactly? Yeah, I worked at West Helena until I worked in Arkansas from May 1965 until I don't remember exactly when in 1967. I had to come out because I was sick. And I was in Atlanta, where I saw the doctor, and then I knew John Buffington from seeing him at meetings, and John asked me if I would come and work at his project in West Point, Mississippi, and I agreed to do that in 1967. So anyway,
what was his project in West Point?
It was a regular project. It was the same kinds of things. You moved around and you got acquainted with people, and you helped them. If there were challenges that they were facing, problems they were having, you help them to think through things that they could do, or you help them to do things to help solve those problems, and that was the tack we took in the meetings also, people would talk about things that they wanted to see differently in their communities. And we would try to help people to think of what are some things that the community could do to make the changes. How should we proceed to make those changes? And so and you would help people to go forward with their ideas and try as much as possible to not put your stuff on them. You know, let stuff come from them and then support that. You know, like for example, in Jones Ridge, Arkansas, the Turner Elementary School, the families there were disturbed because every time it rained, the toilets would back up, and feces would float down the hall in the elementary school, and so that had been going on for a long, long time, and they had been complaining and trying to get somebody in the county to come and see about it, but no one ever came. And so when we started having the meeting in Jones Ridge, that was one of the things that came up. And so I wasn't working that part of the county. It was my coworker Howard Himmelbaum who was doing the work, and he said to people, well, what do you want to do? And so they said, well, we want to get this changed. And so they thought about all the different things they could do, and then they decided, after they tried going back to the county and seeing about it again, then they decided they should go to Little Rock and go to the health department in Little Rock, which is what they did. And then people came down and checked things out, and they found that the pipes had been laid uphill. And so anytime it rained, that was the problem. So once that was corrected, then the people in that community said, well, we did that. So that was great. Now we can think of other things we can do to make the schools better for our kids. And so that was how we got started. And actually, that energy took us to where people decided that they wanted to do a school boycott and to force desegregation, because at that time they thought that the way that their kids could get the best education was if all the children were educated together. And so they decided to go for that. And we spent a good part of the summer of 1966 moving around to different places in the county and having meetings and talking and building people's confidence up, so that when school started that fall, we held 1,500 of 1,800 black kids out of the segregated school for 6 weeks. And then the school district did capitulate, and they desegregated the schools. But you know, I don't think I said that in any of my little accounts, but midway that process, I began to have different thoughts. I began to feel like we don't need to be doing this, because the hostility was so tremendous. You know, there was great anger that, you know, during the boycott, I wasn't there yet, but anyway, I began feeling like we should not be trying to get in these white schools. We should be trying to do our own school, make our own school what we need it to be. And I attempted to broach that with Mrs. Jackson, the woman who was the matriarch of the family that was central in all of these activities. She just couldn't see it at all. I mean, she was just so caught. Everybody was so caught up with, oh, we're going to finally get our children together. And what she said to me was, when our children get together, they will be fine. It's the children. The children are not full of hate. The children will love each other. And so, you know, but what I was aware of was the fact that the anger and the hostility was so great that we just didn't need to be taking those chances. That was how I felt. And so anyway, but we went ahead, we desegregated. And I don't think it was 5 years later when I went over to see Ms. Jackson one time, and she says, Myrtle, all of my kids hate white folks. I said, and so, I mean, I knew that already. And so she says, well, why is that? I said, well, you know, they are being treated a certain way in the school. And so, you know, once the kids got in the school, they had been in the band in our other school. They couldn't get in the band. There were so many things that they were not allowed to do. And people were condescending to them. And so, and Miss Jackson was so unhappy. And the kids themselves were very unhappy. And so, anyway.
So that's how your thinking evolved once you did come down south and see the realities of certain situations. And
Yes.
so the hostility and hatred was pretty visceral.
Yes.
And part of the struggle. You mentioned Miss Jackson. This is Gertrude Jackson?
Gertrude Jackson, yes.
Right, so this was in the community of Marvell with Erlis and Gertrude Jackson.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about your interactions with them, more about that project and working with the both of them in voter registration and the schools and public safety?
Well, the Jacksons were, the Jackson family was the, you know, like you could say in most projects, there's usually one family that is kind of around which the project, you know, revolves. And so the Jackson family, Mrs. Jackson and her husband Gertrude and Erlis, as well as James Jackson's, Mr. Jackson's brother, as well as a Jackson who was a cousin who owned the store, all of those people were staunchly in support of change for their communities. And Erlis Jackson and James Jackson farmed together. They planted cotton, and I think they planted soybeans. And there was one instance where they were getting ready to harvest their cotton, and sugar was put in the gas tank of their cotton picker. They went out to crank it, and they found that the sugar was in there. And, of course, the engine was destroyed. And so Mr. Jackson, Mr. Erlis Jackson and Mr. James Jackson didn't get upset. They just stopped and took the thing apart, cleaned it, put it back together, and went back to work. And they just kept going like that. So, I mean, they were an inspiration to all of us. They were so strong, and Mr. Erlis Jackson and Miss Gertrude Jackson had 11 children, and they were just, you know, they were just practically fearless. And Miss Jackson had this kind of soft-spoken way, and she was easygoing, and I mean, as I've gotten to know her since then, that was just, in many ways, that was a facade, because she is powerful. So anyway. And so what would happen was that one of the things I would do every week would be move around to different people in the community who were working with us, and just go and visit and sit with them for a little bit to see what they're thinking about. And actually I used that as my preparation for the meeting that we would have later that week. And so I would go and I would sit with each, maybe 4 or 5 different people I would sit with, make sure I knew what was on their minds, and say some things to them that I thought they needed to hear. And so I would go to Miss Jackson, and we would do that. And then what I began to realize after a while, that I didn't pick it up right away, was that when I would go to Miss Jackson would always have great ideas about things to do. And so the way she would do it is she would tell me the idea. And so I would be so excited about it, I would just go to the meeting. And when the meeting was going on, I would present the idea. Then I finally, I backed up a little bit and I thought about it. And I said to myself, Miss Jackson is planting stuff on me, and she should be doing it herself. And so when I finally got clear about that, the next time I went to see Miss Jackson, and she started her little process of putting these ideas on me, I said, Miss Jackson, this is your idea. It's not my idea. It's yours. And so this time when we go to the meeting, you're going to present that idea. I'm not going to present it. And so she said, no, I don't know how to present the idea. You are good at presenting the idea. You are the one that needs to do it. I said, no, Miss Jackson, you are the one who has the idea. And your community needs to know that you are the one who has the ideas. And you are the one who needs to stand on those ideas and help people to know how to do them. And so we went, that first time, I waited until she expressed her idea. It was kind of tense. But she did indeed say what she had on her mind. And then, you know, as time went on, she would do that more and more. But in the long run, it was Mrs. Jackson who pulled people together and got them organized, and they actually set up a community center. And it still is in existence. It's limping, but it's still there. And so, anyway.
So is it fair to assume, I'm trying to understand how this was all pulled together, that volunteers who came from the north, there was always a movement afoot in the communities in the south. So what did the volunteers bring? I mean, it looks like you were looking for it to be a mutual process, that you spent time observing and watching and didn't want to insert yourself and come in there and say that you think you should do this and that, that you were very careful in working with the communities and letting the ideas come from them.
My goal being there was to create a process where they got in touch with the fact that they are capable and where they develop confidence to move and do on their own. And I saw that as the building blocks to them being in charge of their own communities and doing things for themselves. I have to say that where I was successful in that regard with Mrs. Jackson, she was one of the few people who were willing to pick up and assert herself. There were people who wanted to be in charge and to do things, but they didn't trust themselves. And Mrs. Jackson got to where she did trust herself. And so she was able to step forward and do things. The experience I had
Some other community leaders it didn't work the same way.
Well, I mean, for example, now Mr. Jackson, you know, when it came to things that were related to what he had to do, you know, like for example, some people who get sugar in the gas tank of their cotton picker would just be, you know, devastated. But to Mr. Jackson and his brother, it was sort of like, this goes with the territory. Now let's just fix it and keep moving. But every time I came back to visit, Mr. Jackson would tell me stuff. Okay, it would be like, they didn't call me Miss Myrtle, but Myrtle, we still having these problems. And it was sort of like telling me to help him to solve them. And I would always be saying, well, Mr. Jackson, did you do this? Did you do that? Things that I used to say back when. But, you know, where Mrs. Jackson figured out how to send all of her girls to college. I mean, she connected with a woman in Connecticut who was willing to send her money so that those kids could go to college. I mean, I didn't know a thing about how she did it. I didn't know when she did it or anything. She just did that. You know, that, you see the difference in the spirit? And her husband, you know, never, I mean, there were things that he was strong on, but not by comparison to Mrs. Jackson. She was creative. She is creative. You know, she was always looking for ways to do stuff that other people didn't think about. And so, anyway, yeah.
During your time with SNCC, the dynamics of group leadership and participation really changed in relationship to the white workers. What did you witness in the communities in which you worked?
Well, my co-worker, Howard Himmelbaum, was a Jewish guy. And we worked fine. I mean, I thought we worked fine. We did work fine, actually. We didn't have any conflicts of any sort. But But when we were planning for things to do, the two of us always talked, and we always worked out whatever differences of opinion we might have before we went to do things. Like, like I think I mentioned in one of my write-ups that we did this. We had this workshop for people. It was like a legal support workshop where people who were trying to get on welfare and couldn't came, and a lawyer would talk to them. Anyway, I was saying that, I said that. But Howard attended the meeting in New Orleans where the decision was made that the white workers should leave the black communities and go and work in white communities. And when he came back, he just matter-of-factly said to me, Myrtle, I'm going to leave in X number of days. What we decided at the meeting was this. And so he told it to me, and he did indeed leave. And I was worried, I was scared at first. But once he was gone, I found that there was stuff inside me I didn't even know I had. And so, when it came time to make decisions, I was perfectly capable to make them on my own. I began coming up with ideas I didn't even know were there. And I was feeling very good and very confident. And so that doesn't speak to the question of him being a white person at all. It speaks to me. My sense of what it was that I was deferring to him. I was in that traditional man-woman role, where the woman gives over to the man, and I didn't realize I was doing that. And so I discovered some things about myself once he left. And so, anyway.
Do you have a sense what the larger discussion was? Because obviously it empowered you to feel like that there was more that you could do and that you had the capability to be out there on your own. But it sounds like you were kind of working on your own where other people were spread out all over the place. Did you have a sense of what some of the larger questions that people were asking in regard to making that change about where white workers would work and where black workers would work?
Well, I understood entirely that it was difficult for black people to get to where they could feel comfortable doing things for themselves with a white person in a position of, to their way of thinking, of authority. Even though I did my best to say to people and to behave to people, you are in charge of your community. I'm here to help you to think about what you want to do and to plan for things that you need to do and to do those things effectively. It was fine for me to say that, but it was quite a different thing for people to fully buy it and not see me as an authority figure because I came from somewhere. I was a college graduate. I was actually a master's degree person at that time. And I had a level of expertise. I could talk well. I could write well. I knew I had a whole lot of knowledge that people didn't have. So for them to rise up and also, not think of me as someone in charge, that was a challenge. And so if I had been white, that's even more of a challenge. And I understood that. I saw that. I didn't see it as clearly before Howard left as I did after he was gone. I saw it, and I saw how people had backed off and how they weren't as comfortable to be themselves around him. And so, of course, my position was not to rub that in his face because he had done many things in that community that helped that community. And I respected that, and I respected him. As a matter of fact, I like him. I'm still in touch with him. In many ways, we lived in the same house. He was like a brother to me. And so it's complex. Mm-hmm. It's not anything, it's not open and shut. But the part that could be open and shut is for white people to get to where they become aware of who they are and how they impact other people black people. And for Howard was willing to pull himself back and do some reflecting to see how that was. I don't remember that we ever talked about any of this. But does that get closer to what you want me to talk about?
It does.
Okay.
So it was not only a change you noticed in yourself, but you did notice a change with the community members you worked with.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So how long did you spend in the South, or when did you finish your work with SNCC?
I left SNCC in the fall of 1967, and I worked as a full-time worker until from May of 1965 until the fall of 1967. By this time, I'm in Mississippi, and I'm flat out broke, and there was an opportunity for a job in the Head Start program, and so I took that job. Yeah.
Following your work, your formal work with the movement, you went on to write and teach about two of our most renowned African American leaders, W.E. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And between 1985 and 1993, you were the founder and director of Charleston's Avery Research Center. How do you consider these activities to be part of your ongoing contribution to the freedom movement?
Well, first of all, I became an activist. When you become an activist, you don't give up being an activist. It gets inside you. And so, I approached things. I guess I was an activist when I was a kid because I went straight at stuff. And I had to learn how to go at stuff and not go so dead straight. Because lots of times when you go straight at stuff, you turn people off, and they are people that you need to be connected to. And so, what did I do first? After I left, after I worked with it, I taught at the first thing I did that was not, I taught at Tougaloo College right after I worked in the movement. And in a sense, that was an extension of, I worked in the Head Start program, and I don't know if anyone has said this to you or not, to in an interview or not, but the Head Start program was the Head Start program in Mississippi, which was started in 1965, was the first Head Start program in the country. And the way it got started was that the white volunteers who had worked in Mississippi came back home all caught up with their feelings about how people were so poor, and people did not have decent schools, and people did not have enough food to eat. They got involved in trying to set up some kind of program to meet those needs. What they came up with was the Head Start program. And so, on the one hand, in the sense that it in one sense, it was an excellent situation, because for the first time, people who had been working the cotton fields and making stuff like $10 and $12 a day were making $65 a week. I mean, I shouldn't say $10 and $12 a day, $5 a day. You pick a certain number of pounds, you get $5 for that, and you work 12 hours to do that. So those people had jobs where they were making $65 a week. And it was the first time black folk had jobs that were not connected to the white power structure in Mississippi. At the same time, by placing the program on the wheels and the infrastructure of the movement, it gradually destructed that infrastructure. And so what I'm talking about is how people got together to create programs for their children before Head Start, and to work out ways to feed their children before Head Start on their own, out of their own funds. When the money came, then there got to be concerns about, well, who makes the decision about who gets the jobs? And how do, where's my tissue? It's gone. And how do people get to have these jobs? And so what you had was people who had worked together all through the movement being separated because so-and-so was on the board and he made sure all his family got the jobs. And Ms. Johnson over here, who had also worked closely with him in the movement days, was not on the board. And so she didn't get to have any say about who got the jobs. And furthermore, she might not have gotten one herself. And so that just dropped all kinds of poison down into the infrastructure of the movement. And so after a while, people who had been close, who had worked hard together, who had just struggled together, weren't speaking to each other. It was very painful to watch, very painful. So anyway, I worked for that program. I was the director of the community program organizers. You know, there were, and then I don't know that you probably don't know, but Senator Stennis fought the Head Start program. You know, every time, like we had the funding, I think, for whatever period we had the funding for, and the program was going along, and everybody who worked in the program had formerly been working in the movement. And so people continued to do the things they had done in the movement to make sure folks got information, to make sure folks stayed abreast of certain issues, make sure folks got out to vote and stuff like that. And so of course Stennis fought it. This is a federal program supposed to be for education and food and changing communities. It's not supposed to be the movement. So he would bring the program to a dead stop. And so people would not have jobs for X amount of months. And then there'd be a big fight in Washington. And then the program would come back. And then there'd have to be a decision about, well, who's going to get the jobs this time? Who's going to be on the board? Of course, there were all these rules and regulations that people had to go by in relationship to that. And so, anyway, that's
Got very complicated and
very
political.
complicated, very political, and really nasty. It was deeply disturbing. And I was right up in the center of it. You know, folks like me always had the job. And so people who had worked in the movement with me were angry at me because I had the job. And of course, it didn't have nothing to do with, I had the job because I had the job. But their jobs had been cut off because the program was stopped. So even during the time when the program had stopped, there were certain people who kept on working. I'm one of those. I got to a place where I decided, well, this time when the program stops, I'm quitting. And that's how I just waited. I just stopped working until the program came back, and then I went back to work because it was too painful. You know, it was just too painful because folks were angry at the way the program was going anyway, and then of course I was a butt of all that. It was just very, very hard, very hard. Anyway.
So you did your work with Head Start, and I
Did my work with Head Start, and then I went to Tougaloo College, and I taught at Tougaloo from 1967, from 1969 to 1972, and I taught in the sociology department, taught for Dr. Ernst Berinsky. And because of who I was, to a large extent, I just continued doing what I had always been doing, bringing information to people, helping the kids to understand certain kinds of things. You know, at the time I became a Muslim. I was in the nation, and I was passing that information on to people, how to eat to live. And so the kids would be walking around campus saying, "Did you hear what Glascoe said last week? She said you're supposed to eat this and you're not supposed to eat that." but I enjoyed that tremendously. And I also I developed a course that was called the Small Grouping Process, where we focused on getting to know ourselves as individuals and also as people who are part of communities. And I've had young people to say to me that that course caused them to think about themselves in ways that they had never realized that they needed to. And it helped to change their lives. And to some extent, I still have versions of that course salted into everything I do. That is like in my teaching. And so, anyway.
Is it a course that kind of mimics your own evolution in your own life, kind of being a part of community and getting involved? Did your own experiences kind of feed into developing that course?
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure of that, but it's actually focused on. See, the challenge for me has been getting to know myself, getting to know who I am, getting to know what my gifts are, what my liabilities could be, what areas of my personality need me to be aware of them and be on top of them all the time. And that was the gift I attempted to give to my students through that course. That it's very important for you to know how you affect others. When you go into a situation, what's your personality like? Are you open and outgoing? Are you shy and retiring? Do you just kind of take things as you go along? And in any of those cases, how would that affect other people who are just meeting you? And so if you want to be, like for most recently, I've been teaching education. And the way I would approach that whole set of issues was, well, each one of you has a story. And each one of you needs to tell your story to yourself first. And then you need to tell your story to the class so that each one of us can get to know each other. And so, in that process, I actually set up a format for people to follow to do that. And so it was what I would ask them is, what are you bringing in your suitcase with you of your beliefs and your attitudes into classrooms where children are? Do you know what you have in your suitcase? If you look in your suitcase that you're bringing with you and you see some things that you'd rather not that children have, do you know how to take those things out of your suitcase? Do you know how to adjust those things so that you don't bring that in its form that it's in now to the classroom? Can you see how that would affect the young people in the classroom? Those are the kinds of things. That's how I do it now.
Well, you made the comment earlier about...
Excuse me, I'll have to change the tape right now.
Oh.
So you but I wasn't there on my own. I was in support of work that was already going on, and I attended meetings, and I participated in discussions with people, and John had started a restaurant in West Point, and I did things to help out with the restaurant, and and we got, by this time John had figured out how to get food stamps for us. So I was in charge of the food stamps, and I would buy all the food, and people would get mad with me because I wouldn't buy stuff they wanted. And anyway, it was, I mean, I really don't remember more than attending meetings and being in support of the work that was already going on there when I came. And so, yes. I didn't do voter registration in West Point. I did some voter registration in Arkansas.
In Arkansas, okay.
Right, but I didn't do voter registration in West Point at all.
I wanted to get back to a comment you had made, once an activist, always an activist,
Mm-hmm.
and how that activist mentality or your work on the freedom movement, how you move that forward in some of your other work. For instance, your writings on Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, or your work at the Avery Center. And if you could talk a little bit about that, just to see how that mentality, what you were able to take, what you've worked in on the past, and how to bring that into some of your.
Well, I mean, it's not a. First of all, I need to say it's not a conscious process. What I'm saying is it's not something that's up here and you plan it. But my way is to be upfront and to be straight ahead. And I had to learn at the Avery Project that wasn't going to work. That to be upfront and straight ahead with people who were waiting for you to give over to them was not going to work. And so, but at the same time, they were kind of in a tight position.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Avery Project, just for the record?
Okay. I was invited in 1985 to be the founding director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. It was envisioned as an archives by a group of people who had attended the Avery School. The Avery School was founded in 1865, and it was the first academic high school for black people in Charleston, South Carolina. And it remained open as an academic high school for black people until, I believe it is till 1954. And by that time, by 1954, the city of Charleston had a school that also that had combined academic and vocational pursuits. And right now, the name of that school doesn't come to me, but and so the Avery School was closed in 1954, but and the building that had been built for it. And I need to go back and say this: during the years that the Avery School was open, it was supported by the American Missionary Association, which I'm fuzzy with the information. By the American Missionary Association, I was going to say, and that there's a connection between the American Missionary Association and the Amistad, and I can't speak about it directly right now, but anyway, so there's a lot of history in there. And so anyway, people who had it was a school that had a reputation of being discriminatory inside the black community. There were comments made that black-skinned people did not go to the Avery. That the Avery, if you got there and you were black-skinned, that you were there, but the Avery did not welcome black-skinned people. They welcomed light-skinned black people to the Avery. And so that was one of the reputations of the Avery. But the story, the long and the short of it is, graduates of that school, after the school was closed, and it went through a number of different incarnations with different organizations living in that building, those graduates got together and they wanted to get the building back and put back into it an institution that would support the education of black people in Charleston. And so I was invited down to head that up. When I got there, the organization, it called itself the Avery Institute for African American History and Culture. I think they called themselves the Avery Institute of African American History and Culture. They had written a grant and they had written a grant to the National Endowment for the Humanities and received a planning grant. And so there was a plan in place, and so my job was to bring that plan into fruition. And I went to work on that. When I came, the building was not in any way usable. It was sitting there, and it was deteriorating. And so, boy, oh boy, to go back and try to recap all that.
Recap everything.
But but what was clear to me when I first came was that because I I was given an office that was about twice the size of this room. And I was told, to work in that office. And of course, that first year, I had enough money to get me through the budget year. I actually had some money left over at the end of the year. So the first thing I started thinking about was, how was I going to spend that money? How was I going to make it worth the while of it being there? And so I purchased collections from Guy and Candy Carawan of the music of Johns Island. I purchased that collection, and also the art, the photographs. I can't remember. You know all this, right? Mm-hmm. So that was my first purchase, and so I found out that was actually Guy and Candy came by to say hello, and we got into this conversation, and they started telling me about how the people on Johns Island really did want those materials to be available to them. And so he talked about it as if I could, I would make this available. And so I said, well, Guy, I think I have enough money in my budget that I could possibly work on bringing those materials here. And so I did. And so I let him know shortly, and then we got this process going where we purchased the collection. I don't remember what we paid for it. We purchased the collection. We purchased the photographs. Was the guy's name Yellen? I don't remember what his name is. We purchased the photographs from him, and we purchased the music. I guess I don't know who owned the music. Anyway, we got it. So I got that, and I bought some furniture for my office. That was the way I used that budget money. And I got busy thinking about what kind of ways could we do other things to let people know that we were there and that we were alive. And so the first thing I did was to plan a conference on the work of black women in South Carolina. And of course, I think prior to that, I think I did that right in the beginning. And so at the end of the budget year, I found out that the folk in South Carolina who make decisions about who's going to get money and who's not going to get money had made a decision that since we didn't have any operation, there was no reason for us to have any money. And so they said that to me, and so I started telling them all the things that we had done and all the things I had intended to do. So they gave me a budget for the next year. And it went like that for the next couple of years. And then with me planning, the program that Elaine talked about, the study of African American funeral and mourning customs. We also did that. We did that project, and Elaine worked with us in that project. And so we did all kinds of stuff until we had a building where we could do stuff in. Then, of course, as I was going along, we started working to do the building. We had to come up with a plan for how we were going to do it, where we were going to get the money from, and can't think of the man's name right now. There was a black person in the legislature, a black Charlestonian who was in the legislature, and he was instrumental in helping us to come up with a plan for how we could do that. And so, and the other thing that I didn't mention was prior to my coming, the organization, the organization of graduates had lobbied the state legislature and gotten a commitment from them to support the development of the Avery Research Center. And so, anyway, all of it is about how I was able to figure out ways to keep it alive until we actually got into the building, got the building going. And of course, part of doing that was the building had to be fully renovated. And of course, the college was doing that. And anyway, if I tell, what else you want to know about that? I could talk about that for the rest of the afternoon.
Do you see that work that in working with this center for, let's see, what you were there?
Do I see it as part of my activism?
Yes, and in what way? Or when looking back on it now?
I mean, the bottom line on that is that I may be mistaken, but the average person who would come somewhere to work would expect people to tell her what to do and to say, well, you can do that, you can use these funds to do this, you can use these funds to do that. My position was the funds are there, I'm in charge of them, I'm going to figure out what to do with the money. I'm not going to ask nobody what I should do with this money. I'm going to figure out, and then I began to realize that my boss, who was the director of libraries at the college, had said to me, I don't want any surprises. So I took a position that anything I was getting ready to do, I would tell him. And I literally would tell him. I would say, David, what I'm thinking about is this. And I would lay it out what I was thinking about, whatever it was. And he instead of him saying, I don't think you should do that, he would say, well, I don't know if that's a good idea. If he did not tell me no, I was gone. That's the activism. If he did not say no, I just went ahead and did it. And so, which means that every budget I had, I spent all of the money when I was supposed to spend it. I bought books, I bought tapes, I bought equipment. I have a copy of the Du Bois papers there. I did a whole bunch of stuff. And so, it was about, we're going to keep this thing going, we're going to make it work, we're going to bring it to life. It's going to have a life. Literally, and of course that's where I ran into trouble with the school. It's going to have a life of its own. Because my position is, when you put something into action, it does create a life of its own. And your job is to see what that is and then to implement it. But the college didn't want that. The college wanted to put the Avery together. They wanted to sit over there so they could say, oh, you see this lovely place that we gave the black people? Isn't it wonderful? It is wonderful. But it has a life of its own. If you're not going to honor the fact that it has a life of its own, I had to leave. I literally had to leave because I got to a point where it was clear to me that the college wanted me to sit there and move papers. Because I was interested in an oral history project. I was interested in having the freedom to see what needed to be done and getting out there and doing it. This is an institution that is here for black people. And it goes out to find the black people and to do the work that the black people need to have done. You don't bring me in here and set me up in this place and then tell me I have to have this hat on my head that's going to keep me from seeing stuff. Nope, you don't do that to me, not me. And then, of course, I went over to the college to teach in the School of Education. And they gave me a syllabus to teach the introductory course in education to people who are going to be teachers. And the first thing I noticed was they had nothing in there about anything except white people. So by this time, in education circles, we're talking about multicultural. So by this time, so the first thing I do in that course is to introduce Native people, African people, Asian people, all of the different permutations of that. And I don't ask them, can I do this in my course? In so many words, when people would ask me, I say, I don't know how to teach the course unless I teach this. Do you see who I am? Anyway.
We didn't get to talk a little bit about your work with W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, your research. And I was wondering if you brought any insight to that, given your involvement in the freedom movement when you started to work on these topics or teach and write about them. Were there any kind of new insights that you had bringing their words and writings of a previous era?
Well, the bottom line on all of that is I have done one published article. I've done about 3 published articles about my work on Du Bois. I did my work on Du Bois' educational thought and how it evolved and how it changed over the years. And I'm getting ready now to go back and publish that material. I'm getting ready to get into that dissertation and pull it up and bring all of what I have now to it. And I mean, it's interesting because when I was invited to give a paper at Greeley, Colorado, and on Du Bois' role in founding the NAACP. And in that context, I wove the ideas on education into all that. And so what I realized then was I'm much better prepared now to approach that work from a perspective of what I can bring as a result of all my different experiences, what I can bring to, what insights I might be able to bring to his thoughts. And I haven't given as much time as maybe I will give to Booker T. Washington. But one of the things that I'm clear about is that, you know, the whole Tunis idea. Where I take it is that the Tunis idea reflects, on the one hand, what I believe Du Bois was saying was that on the one hand, we are African, and on the other hand, we are American. And where I take that in terms of education is that as teachers, we must be aware of the fact that African American children must have opportunities to reflect the culture that they come out of. And at the same time, they must prepare to live in this society, even though their lives in the society will contradict many of the values that they bring with them from their culture. And that for me is a level of the complexity and the intricacy of those ideas. And that's in terms of the Tunis. And so I'm trying to think if I could just bring anything else right off the top of my head in relationship to all of this. I don't know that I can. And I see myself connecting to Du Bois' ideas about what we'll call the talented tenth. You know that in the beginning, he envisioned this group of people who were. He envisioned the talented tenth in terms of what they were bringing as well as who they were in terms of the class base for it. And you also know that later in the 1930s, he got to the point where he began to say, well, the way I approached it in the beginning doesn't work. And what I want are the most talented and the most gifted of our young people to come forward and be ready to serve. And the way to get them is not to go about it in the way that I was going before. And what I see now is there's so many things that are going on that are about those of us who have must turn around and give. That's what I see. And I will have an opportunity to write about that later as I take that work to publication.
In your perspective, are there lessons to be learned or to be passed on based on your involvement in the freedom movement to young people to today? Are there some things that worked then that won't work now? Are there some lessons to remember from them that we need to people need to implement now? What would you say in that regard, given the current climate of things?
What I would say is that our struggle is to fully prepare our young people to know, on the one hand, who they are as individuals and as members of a particular community, and at the same time enable them to see clearly what the society is about, to see the contradictions between who they are and as members of a particular community, the contradictions between that and what the society says it is, what the society purports to offer, and to prepare those young people to live and to survive in the context of the reality that we face. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I learned a lot.
Did you?
I like the details.
Oh, thank you.
I like the details. We're done.
Thank you both. If we can just sit and be quiet for maybe 15 seconds, just for room tone, so we can blend that into the interview. Thank you. Cartone? Okay, thank you very much.
Anyway, I don't know what we're in such a dilemma, in so many words. Our children are lost. The so-called desegregated education is not serving us. It does not prepare our young people for the lives that they need to lead in this society. And furthermore, there is no place except that we do it ourselves where our children can know and understand what's going on in this society. How the oppression is still here, it's alive and well, and it surrounds us and it eats on us. So, and my challenge, and the challenge I think that faces all of our people, is number one, to accept the fact that the racism and the oppression is here. It's alive and well. It's not going anywhere. And that our job is to do the same job our ancestors had to do. Is to face it, accept it, and work out ways that we're going to have decent lives in spite of it. And what that means is, on the one hand, we're going to know who we are. We're going to know what we can do. We're going to have skills to do it. At the same time, we're going to know about this thing that calls itself a society, and what it is, and how it functions, and how we fit into it or don't fit into it, so that we can manage our lives in it. Because we can't go, we ain't got no place to go. You know, one of the most exciting things I've heard lately is how the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey's organization, is saying we need dual citizenship. We need citizenship in an African country, and we need citizenship here. So that, you know, those people who will be able to can pick up and go someplace where they're not going to be the enemy, where they're not going to be treated like dogs. Anyway.
Myrtle,
Yes.
you started talking about the education system and how you feel like it has failed to provide the kind of education that African American children need. Can you say some more about it?
Well, first of all, the teachers do not believe our children are capable of learning. Not only is that the case for European American teachers, it is the case for Black American teachers who have been educated in this system, who have been taught how to teach by people who accept the idea of the innate inferiority of people of color. And so when we have teachers who are with our children and with having those attitudes, there is no expectation that the children will learn, will have the capacity to learn. And so the experiences that the children need are not offered to them. And many times the teachers don't even know that they have these attitudes themselves, which is the reason why when I'm working with people who are going to be teachers, I ask them, what are you bringing with you? What are your attitudes? What are your beliefs? What did you bring from your house? What did you bring from your upbringing? How do you know how you're going to approach these young people? And so many teachers, so many young people that are taught, and especially at Gettysburg College, believe that their job was to keep the children quiet while they gave lectures to the children, while they tell the children what they're supposed to know. They had no sense of the fact that the children are human beings and that they have inner selves that need to be awakened, and part of education is about that. They didn't even know that about themselves. When I would ask them, you know, when I would be teaching and I would say to you, well, you have this assignment, and your assignment is to read X and X and X and X, and come back prepared to discuss. So the students would come back, well, what are you going to give on the test? I would say to them, I said, well, you read, I said, now this is my test for the question. This is my question for the test. You have read such and such and such and such and such and such. And you have also learned that such and such and such and such is going on in schools. So how do you take those ideas that you learned when you read and apply them to what's going on in the schools? In what ways would you change the kinds of things that are going on in the schools? Of course, the students don't want to do that because it makes them think. They don't want to do that. They don't want to think. They want to have the answer. They want me to tell them, want me to ask them questions that's going to give them an opportunity to give the answer that they read in the book. It's not me. You have to think. In order for you to teach my child, you have to be thinking, because my child has to learn how to think. If you don't believe in yourself and you're not able to think, how are you going to teach my child? You can't. And I'm not talking about just black children. I'm talking about all children, all of us, you know. And in this society, poor white children are in as much trouble as black children are, and other children of color. And so, anyway. Those are my thoughts. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask you one question?
Yes.
I was wondering, when you were thinking about going down south
Yes.
that first time, did people try to talk you out of it?
I didn't tell anybody. I just went ahead and did it. But of course, my mother came down to visit. When my mother got there, she was, I mean, I met a new mother. She behaved like she was an activist. And she was going around talking about what her group was doing things. She was a nurse, and her group of nurses had decided that they were going to find clothes and package them and send them down to us, which was fine. And so she went around telling everybody, and everybody was talking about, oh, mother's just like, the daughter's just like the mother. And then when I got home, my mother looked at me. I hadn't been in the house 5 minutes. She says, you will never get a husband down there. And I didn't have enough sense to say to my mother, well, Mama, I didn't go there to get a husband. I went there to do some other things. Yeah. So anyway, no one actively tried to deter me. Matter of fact, as I remember, some people thought I was courageous. Are you going to do that? Yes, I am. And they thought I was courageous, you know. But I wasn't at home. I was in California. My family was back in D.C., but my family wasn't happy with me being there. My godmother was she understood what I was about. She was good with it. But my mother was, as I know now, my mother was terrified. She was afraid for me, and she was worried about me, and she wanted me to be on the path that she thought I needed to be on, which was going to get a husband and getting married and having some kids.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture.